So in a day-to-day living experience, they just rely on people to do things for them. They struggle to believe in their own competence, and they have a low level of motivation. Hi, this is Jim Brillon. Welcome to this YouTube channel where we talk about all things mental health. Today I'm going to be talking about dependent personality disorder. What is it? What does it look like? How can you help somebody with this? And what does treatment look like? So dependent personality disorder is what's considered a cluster C personality disorder. These are personality issues that are centered around anxiety and fearful presentations. Looking at the diagnostic criteria for it, there are basically 8 criteria, and a person has to meet 5 of them in order to have a diagnosis of this personality disorder. I'll go through them with you quickly. The first is a difficulty making routine decisions without input or reassurance or advice from other people. So they become very reliant on other people just to make basic decisions like, what am I going to wear today, or what are we going to eat today? Requiring others to assume responsibilities that they could do for themselves. So in a day-to-day living experience, they just rely on people to do things for them. You can start to see how this can become problematic in interpersonal relationships. There's a fear of disagreeing with others or risking disapproval. Difficulty starting projects without support from other people. They struggle to believe in their own competence, and they have a low level of motivation. They have an excessive need for reassurance, nurturance from others, and they even allow others to impose themselves rather than risk rejection or disapproval. And this is where you can start to see a person with this type of personality, how they can become victims of abusers. They feel vulnerable and helpless when they're alone, and they desperately seek another relationship as soon as one ends. So this is what starts to look like what we think of as love addiction, where somebody can't be on their own, they can't be single, they need to be in a relationship. And they have unrealistic preoccupation with being left alone and being unable to care for themselves. So looking at all of these issues that happen for people with this personality type, what causes that? Ultimately, it's caused from a person developing fearful attachment growing up. They can often have separation anxiety that's often due to real lived experiences of being separated from their early caregivers. Often there's a history of childhood trauma, neglect, sometimes abuse. One parenting style that's been identified as problematic and often leading to this development of personality disorder is authoritarian or overprotective parenting. Authoritarian parenting is where mom and dad are sort of dictators rather than running a democracy. It's my way or the highway, and kids in the family don't really have a voice. An overprotective parent is somebody who does things for your kids that they could do for themselves, so they never develop a sense of competence and autonomy. It shows up differently for different people, but many people with this personality type are very prone to anxiety and depression, and often will get into treatment because of the depression or the anxiety before they ever have a diagnosis of a personality disorder. That's also something to be aware of. They can become dependent on substances, so the risk of developing an addiction is actually pretty high. The struggle, again, is with basic belief in their own competence and with dysfunctional attachment. And often these people feel very helpless, and they can become people pleasers because they fear speaking up for themselves and risking disapproval. They struggle just to make decisions, and they can be very pessimistic in their the way that they look at the world. That's something that can be worked on, though. You can learn optimism, and maybe that's something to talk about in another video. But the risk, again, is that they can become victims of abusers, and that's something to be very cognizant of. They often have problems with maintaining employment because they're not generally self-starters, and they struggle with their self-confidence and believing in themselves, believe that other people are better and more competent than them. One thing to be aware of with this personality disorder is that the symptoms can actually get worse as the person grows and ages, which is not always true for other personality disorders. They can often be confused with codependence and avoidant personality disorder. They become dependent on a person, but it's more of a one-way dependence, wherein with codependence, it's more of a two-way codependence, where two people in a relationship are dependent on each other to regulate their emotions and meet their emotional needs. It often co-occurs with other issues like avoidant personality disorder, and sometimes is confused with borderline personality disorder. In both cases, there's an intense fear of abandonment, but with a dependent personality, the person, when they feel that fear of abandonment, they become clingy. When a person with borderline personality feels that abandonment, they become rageful. So it's a very different presentation. And it can often co-occur with obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Treatment is available, and people with this personality type are actually very responsive to treatment. Cognitive behavioral treatment, particularly focusing on assertiveness training, can be highly effective for these people. Also, once a childhood trauma is identified, something like EMDR might be very helpful with them as well. One thing to be aware of is that a dependent personality in treatment can start to develop a dependence on the therapist. So the therapist has to be very aware of that and has to be aware of encouraging independence and autonomy and not relying on the therapist solely. In relationships, like I say, it can be very problematic. It can cause resentment and even distancing behaviors in a partner. What you can do to help somebody who has a dependent personality disorder is, first of all, educate yourself about it. Learn what it is and how to recognize it, and encourage them to make decisions for themselves. Encourage independence, and encourage them to maybe make pros and cons lists of what's the pros and cons of actually making that decision or speaking up in that instance, and go through that list with them and maybe identify some of the irrational thoughts. Another thing you can do for somebody that has a dependent personality disorder is stop making decisions for them. Really encourage them to step into their own power. You want to give them reassurance, but also let them know that you can't reassure them all the time in every situation, and that they can rely on themselves for self-assurance. You want to praise them when they make decisions and give them credit for that. So those are some of the things that you can do to help somebody with dependent personality disorder, and encourage them to get treatment, because they can often be very responsive to treatment and it can help them to really change their lives. If this video is helpful, I encourage you to like and subscribe, get notifications, and leave a comment what you think about it, if you have questions, or what else you'd like to hear about. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.